As we near the end of the school year, students are getting ready to graduate. We're joined by Dr. Matthew Tenenbaum, the Associate Medical Officer of Health at Wellington Dufferin Guelph Public Health. Let's get right to it, Dr. Tenenbaum. We want to talk about an interesting topic today, why you say it's important for students exiting grade 12 to get vaccinated before graduating.
Yeah, so vaccines are something that we think about being important for people all throughout life. And when people move from grade 12 to university or college or whatever part of their life comes next, that's a significant transition, and it can affect people's ability to access vaccines. For example, if you're moving from a town you grew up in to another part of the province or the country or internationally, that can make it very practically important to think about how you'd access vaccines. Additionally, your ability to access certain vaccines for free does change. We talk a lot about vaccines that are given in school. So for example, in grade 7, we recommend that people get vaccines against meningitis, vaccines against HPV, as well as vaccines against hepatitis B. And those are free if you get them and catch up if you miss them, as long as you get them before the end of high school. But after high school, you would have to pay, and it's a very practically important consideration for people.
How many different types of vaccines would people have to be paying for when they do graduate?
So there aren't any particular vaccines that we recommend people get at graduation. We do think about graduation as the time when it's important to make sure that vaccines that you've previously been eligible for that are publicly funded are caught up on. So it's a good time to check your vaccine records, make sure that if you're overdue for things like your tetanus booster or your HPV vaccine or your meningitis vaccine, it's a good time just to check to make sure you've gotten those, because again, if you haven't gotten them yet, you can catch up, and typically that's going to be free. Once you move from sort of the childhood and teenager vaccines into adulthood, there are other vaccines that are recommended from time to time, and some of those may be worth paying for. One of the ones we often talk about for people moving from high school into like a university dormitory setting, we think about the meningococcal B vaccine. It is not a free public vaccine. It is something that does cost money, but it does cover people against a very important cause of meningitis, which can cause inflammation of the brain. So it is something that, especially in these highly packed dormitory settings people often live in university, we know those are risk settings for that kind of disease, and getting a vaccine before you enter those settings can make a lot of sense.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you about is there some kind of, I guess, more of a risk once you've moved into that dorm facility, more close quarters with other young adults?
So a lot of diseases, if we think about diseases caused by bacteria or viruses, typically being passed from person to person. That's true of COVID or measles or meningococcal disease. A lot of these things are just passed from one person to another as their way of spreading in a population. And so anytime you're in a setting like a university residence or a dormitory, you are typically sharing rooms with others, you're in closer quarters, you're interacting more regularly with more people. All of those things do increase the risk of a whole bunch of different diseases, and it isn't uncommon for us to see outbreaks of certain vaccine-preventable diseases in university dormitories. It's a kind of classic higher risk scenario.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For those students that are getting close to that graduation, close to leaving high school, is there anywhere for them to, I guess, make sure that they have those vaccines or get the vaccines that they want?
So if you want to make sure you're up to date, the key thing is checking your vaccine record. Now, you might have a yellow card at home which has your records. Oftentimes people don't, and then it's a question of going to wherever you got your vaccines in the past. Of course, you can contact us in public health. We can let you know what records we have of yours from vaccines that you may have gotten from us, for example, in schools. As well, if you had vaccines given to you by your family doctor, they can give you an updated assessment of what records they have. But the key thing is just making sure you're not overdue for vaccines, because oftentimes, once you move away from home or once you begin that next phase of life, it does become more challenging to catch up.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. All very good information. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Tenenbaum. That's very good to know heading into the summer break.
Thank you very much, Colton. Good speaking with you.